Well, good evening. I hope and pray that you're well. And I'm going to share with you the message that was shared at Laidley Uniting Church and Hatton Vale Uniting Church this morning. And it is looking at the life of Jacob, which is predominantly focused in from Genesis chapters 25 to 36. I'm going to read to us Genesis 27, verses 1 to 38. When Isaac was old, and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called for his son Esau, his older son, and said to him, "My son." "Here I am," he answered. Isaac said, "I am now an old man, and I don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Now Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau. When Esau left for the open country to hunt game and bring it to back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, 'Bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die.' Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flocks and bring me two choice of young goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father, just the way he likes it. Then take it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies." Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, while I have smooth skin. What if my father touches me, and I should appear to be tricking him, and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing?" His mother said to him, "My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go and get them for me." So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and she prepared some tasty food just the way his father liked it. Then Rebekah took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with the goat skin. Then she handed to her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread she had made. He went to his father and said, "My father." "Yes, my son," he answered. "Who is it?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game, so that you may give me your blessing." Isaac asked his son, "How did you find it so quickly, my son?" "The Lord your God gave me success," he replied. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Come nearer so I can touch you, my son, so to know whether you really are my son Esau or not." Jacob went close to his father Isaac and touched him, and said, his father Isaac, who touched him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau, so he proceeded to bless him. "Are you really my son Esau?" he asked. "I am," he replied. Then he said, "My son, bring me some of your game to eat, so that I may give you my blessing." Jacob brought it to him, and he ate, and he brought some wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, "Come here, my son, and kiss me." So he went to him and kissed him. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him and said, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, and abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you, and people bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed." After Isaac finished blessing him, and Jacob had scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from hunting. He too prepared some tasty food and brought it to his father. Then he said to him, "My father, please sit up and eat some of my game, so that you may give me your blessing." His father Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" "I am your son," he answered, "your firstborn, Esau." Isaac trembled violently and said, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." When Esau heard his father's words, he burst out with a loud and bitter cry, and said to his father, "Bless me too, my father." But he said, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." Esau said, "Isn't he rightly named Jacob? This is the second time he has taken advantage of me. He took my birthright, and now he's taken my blessing." Then he asked, "Haven't you reserved any blessing for me?" Isaac answered Esau, "I have made him lord over you, and have made all his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son?" Esau said to his father, "Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father." Then Esau wept aloud. And this is the word of the Lord. When I was a young Christian, my older brother had a friend who I thought was amazing. He was a Christian, he was smart, funny, handsome, and cool. To top it off, he could practice that great Australian pastime of the put down. I really wanted to be like this person. Somewhere along the line, though, I met my wife Alison, and at that time we started dating. And Alison saw the way I looked up to this friend of my brother, and Alison had concerns. While put-downs may be part of Australian culture, this friend seemed to relish in them, and Alison picked up an arrogance which I hadn't paid attention to. Over time, I came to realise that my brother's friend was not someone whom I should seek to imitate. Now, outside of our church in Laidley, we have a sign that says, "You were born an original, don't die a copy." And I would agree with the sentiment that we are uniquely and wonderfully made. And so part of our worship to God is to use the particular ways that he has created us for our Father's praise and glory. However, I also know that it's natural and healthy for people to learn from others, and a useful way of learning is to imitate. One of the verses of the Bible which both inspires me as well as terrifies me is 1 Corinthians 11 verse 1. "Be imitators of me, just as I also am of Christ." I find these verses a great encouragement because it reminds me that serving in ministry isn't rocket science. It doesn't require necessarily high level degree in management, and we don't have to have perfect recollection of important theological terms. No, in one sense, it is also simple, but that's also why this verse can terrify me. Who am I truly imitating? Am I imitating Jesus, or am I imitating someone who helps me to be more like Jesus? Or am I imitating someone who I think is cool or popular or whatever else I may be focused upon? And if people are following my example, do they really become more like Jesus or not? It's so simple, but it's not easy. When it comes to imitating others, we sometimes look at stories of the patriarchs such as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or other heroes of the Bible, and we see in them examples, or we seek in them examples of to follow. However, as you've probably realized by now as we've gone through Genesis, there are a lot of aspects of the lives of the heroes of the faith which should not be imitated. Now, one character who is vitally important and yet is also an example of someone who has significant character flaws and thus shouldn't be directly imitated is the person who gives his name to the very people of God, and that is Jacob, who also received the name Israel. And today I want to look at this Jacob, Israel's very interesting and varied life. One of the interesting aspects of Jacob's life is that he is a great example of how we both have responsibility for our actions, while our lives are also shaped by those around us. If you read the story of Jacob, and I certainly encourage you to do that, it's easy to see that he is something of a swindler and is willing to deceive people. Although this seems to become quite naturally to Jacob, it also appears that this behavior was something which he was surrounded by. We have already heard in the previous weeks that both Abraham and Isaac, so Jacob's grandfather and his father Isaac, they had both sought to present their wives off as their sisters because they thought it was going to be safer for them. So Jacob had grown up with a sense of thinking that you could do certain things that weren't truthful if it was going to be for your safety or advantage. But we actually see this really clearly in the story that I read to us. In the story of Jacob tricking Isaac into giving him the blessing that Isaac had intended for Esau, no one comes out smelling of roses. Every character in this story acts deceptively. To start with, Isaac favored Esau. And he favored Esau for the deeply mature reason that he liked the way Esau cooked food. Now, we're not told that Isaac had been informed by Rebekah, his wife, that God had said to her that the elder son, Esau would serve the younger, Isaac, Jacob. But I think that it's likely because in the culture of the time, when you were to do such a formal blessing of others, you would call witnesses. And Isaac's not doing that. Isaac is seeking to do this on the quiet, and maybe that's because he knows that if he does it publicly, someone will say, "Just a second, we know that there was this prophetic word given that Esau, the elder, would serve the younger. So why are you doing this?" But no, Isaac wants to do this on the quiet. Well, Esau, not surprisingly, appears to be happy to go along with this private blessing, but he also should have spoken up. Esau had sold his birthright to his brother for a bowl of lentils. Give me some of that red stuff before I die. That's what Esau had said to his brother Jacob on one occasion. So Esau should have actually said, "Father, you can't give me this blessing. It belongs to Jacob." He had sworn it as on an oath. It should have been unbreakable. Well, on top of this, we have Rebekah. And rather than directly speaking to Isaac about what he was doing, Rebekah schemes for Jacob to receive the blessing from Isaac. Now, did Rebekah know that what was on the cards or what was coming up? Why was she listening in when Isaac was speaking to Esau? Well, she certainly may have simply been thinking on her feet very quickly, but I wonder here if Rebecca had been planning this for some time. She had an idea of what Isaac would do, and so she's planned ahead to make sure that she can slip in and get the blessing for Jacob. Well, on top of that, we have Jacob. And on this particular occasion, Jacob appears to be somewhat unwilling to deceive his father, if for no other reason than because he was worried about the consequences. Jacob does decide to deceive his blind father, though, and he even invokes the name of God to answer one of the questions Isaac asks of him. How did you get the game so quickly? "Oh, the Lord your God blessed me." The result, though, is that Jacob does win his father's blessing, but needs to go away to Rebekah's brother for his own safety. And while Jacob may be known as a swindler and one who deceives others, it's clear that he was also shaped in this life by how others acted around him. Now, our interactions with others not only shapes the way we view people and it shapes our character, other people also shape our view of God. Why was Rebekah so determined that Isaac blessed Jacob instead of Esau? Well, it appears that Rebekah thought that God's declaration to her that the elder would serve the younger would be derailed were Jacob to bless the elder Esau. There is a sense in which a blessing, though these declared statements, had a power from God, and so once it was given, it couldn't be revoked or altered. That was the mindset. Now, in the Old Testament in particular, we see that the proclaiming of a definitive statement of God is powerful. However, this power stems from the person and character of God, whereas Isaac is taking it upon himself to bless his son. He's not doing something at God's command. Isaac didn't have the power to derail God's plans, even had he blessed Esau instead of Jacob. So we have to be careful. There appears to be something almost superstitious going on here now. Similarly, later in Jacob's life, you may know that he arranged for his wages from his uncle Laban to be in the form of receiving the speckled or spotted sheep and goats. And so as to increase his flocks, Jacob exposed the sheep and goats to bright strips of wood during mating season. And there was an old wives' tale, an ancient belief that by exposing an animal to bright images, that would cause that image to mark that which was conceived. Jacob thinks he has to scheme to increase the flocks. Now, there's a tremendous irony here. Listen to the conversation between Jacob and his uncle Laban, recorded in chapter 30. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me on my way so that I can go back to my own homeland. Give my wives and children for whom I have served you, and I will be on my way. You know how much work I've done for you." But Laban said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, please stay. I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you." He added, "Name your wages and I will pay them." Jacob said to him, "You know how I have worked for you and how your livestock have fared under my care. The little you had when I came has increased greatly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I have been. But now, when may I do something for my own household?" Both Laban and Jacob acknowledge that Laban's flocks have increased under Jacob's care because it was a blessing from Yahweh. But then, after the wages are agreed to, it's almost like Jacob thinks that he has to resort to trickery to grow his flock. Or perhaps Jacob thought he needed to force God's hand. This appears so contrary. They knew that the blessing had come from God. Now they're ignoring that. It's not always easy for us, but we need to be very careful as we read the example of biblical characters to determine whether their behavior lines up with what God declares to be true of himself, or if their behavior might be regarded as superstitious, or of seeking to control God rather than expressing a faith or obedience to God. This is also true when we're tempted to imitate people in ministry. We can be tempted to imitate certain people in ministry who believe that you have to do things in a certain way because it's almost like a ritual or a rote situation. At one example, and slightly silly, I went to a Catholic school for 8 years, and we were asking one time about doing the sign of the cross. And this particular Catholic educator at the time said, "Well, you wouldn't make a phone call without dialing the first three numbers, as if doing the sign of the cross was a prerequisite for God to hear you." That's superstitious. That's foolish. You may do it as a sign of honor. You may do it as a sign of respect. You may do it as a reminder of the triune God to whom we pray, but it's not the first three numbers in a telephone. Similarly, though, we can also think of people who kind of think that you can force God's hand or control the situation just by your own human methods. I was speaking with a church planter in Melbourne, and the Lord had greatly blessed what he had done down there. But he also mentioned while he was mentioned that he was speaking to a person from another church planting group, and they were talking about methods and techniques, and he was like, "Well, what do you do?" And he goes, "Oh, it's all advertising." And the Melbourne church planter was like, "Oh, what?" And this bloke's, "Oh, it's all just advertising and getting people in through the gates." And the church planter's thinking, "Well, what about sharing the good news of Jesus? What about prayer? What about training people and discipling them? What about all these things that are vital because they've been given us as an example by Jesus, and they reflect the character of God?" Well, you can do the character of God thing and reflect the example of Jesus and imitate him, or you can just go for the secular and do a bunch of advertising. We need to be wise. We need to be careful as to who we imitate. Someone who has a superstitious view of God, or somebody who believes that you can force God's hand by your own techniques and methods. What can we learn from this man who obviously, this man Jacob, who obviously had significant character defects and also had a skewed understanding of and trust in God? Well, there is more to Jacob's life which we can learn from, but rather than seeking simply to imitate Jacob, we can learn from what God did in Jacob's life. To start with, God allowed Jacob to have a taste of his own medicine. Now, yes, Jacob was only one player in gaining the blessing which Isaac had intended for Esau, but he did have a significant role in deceiving Isaac. I wonder how Jacob felt later when his uncle Laban deceived Jacob into marrying his elder daughter Leah when Jacob was keen to marry Rachel. He didn't even discover it until the morning after the wedding. He wakes up, and who is he beside? It's Leah. And Laban tricks him into working for another 7 years. Later again, after agreeing to the wages, Laban arranged for all the spotted and speckled sheep and goats to be moved from the flock which were under Jacob's responsibility, and he moved them to his other flocks. And so Jacob may have been thinking, "Okay, well, I'm going to start with this group of sheep and we'll build from there." And then he turns up and all those sheep are gone, and he starts with just normal sheep, normal goats, and he has to start afresh. I wonder if it was from being on the receiving end of this deceptive behavior which gave Jacob an insight into what he had done to his brother Esau. I wonder if this then prompted Jacob's desire to be reconciled. So Jacob reached out to Esau and provided gifts of cattle, when God instructed Jacob to return to the land of his fathers. Rather than imitating Jacob, we can learn from the story of Jacob that to help us see our need for God, we may well be on the receiving end of similar treatments to how we treated others. And while forgiveness is always available, we may also experience the consequences of what we have done, with this being for the sake of our growth, which should also shape future interactions with others for the better. Related to being shaped by God, it's important for us to remember that God's time frame is not ours. In an era when we can get a movie or a book in minutes, if not seconds, it's staggering to think that Jacob lived with his uncle for 20 years before being directed back to the promised land. So as Jacob fled from his brother Esau, God appeared to him and promised to bless him. And then he stayed with his uncle for 20 years before God speaks to him again and instructs him, go back to the land of your fathers. That was 14 years for his wives and then 6 years for his wages. God shapes our lives over the long haul and for the long haul. Now, I still have a long way to go in my own walk with God, but I'm glad I'm not the same person that I was when I first became a Christian, and nor am I the same leader that I was when I first entered ministry. Perhaps you can relate to this yourself. I don't know if you'd say you've been putting your trust in Jesus for 2 weeks or 2 years or 20 years or maybe 200 years. I won't say if there's anyone in my church who I think could have been following Jesus for that length of time. But maybe take the time to consider how God has been shaping and changing you and give thanks for that. And also reflect on what else in your life God may wish to address. God is in the business of shaping us over the long haul. Finally, the story of Jacob reminds us that God pursues us and desires for us to surrender ourselves to God's love for us and plans for us. You likely know the story of Jacob wrestling with God, and it is from that Jacob receives the name Israel. I'd encourage you to take some time, maybe this next week, take some time to read the story of Jacob wrestling with God in Genesis 32. In that story, we read it and we see the story of Jacob wrestling, and he's wrestling and he seems to be doing well. But then God is ultimately the powerful one. And God is the one with the victory, because for all the fact that Jacob can wrestle for as long as he wants, all it takes is a simple touch from God, and Jacob is made a cripple. Jacob's made a cripple, and all he can do then is hold on. And we know that Jacob recognizes the superiority of the one he is wrestling, because he says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And so in that culture of the time, the greater blesses the junior, or greater blesses the lesser. And so by Jacob crying out, I will not let you go until you bless me, he is acknowledging, you are the more powerful, you are the greater, and I desire your blessing. Now, while Jacob, like Abraham, directly encountered Yahweh, God deals with us personally through his word and by people sharing God's word with us and helping us to understand it, accept it, and apply it. And that very process can sometimes seem like a wrestle. There are times when I see my daughters do something wrong and I think, I probably can't get too mad at them because I know precisely who they learnt that from. And no, it wasn't their mum. My prayer for them and my prayer for all the people for whom I pastor is that I would be better at imitating Jesus, because then I would be worthy of being imitated. That said, I'm also thankful. I'm thankful for what we learn from the life of Jacob. I'm grateful for the reminder that we are shaped by the people dear to us and through our circumstances. And this doesn't excuse our flaws and wrong behavior, but it helps us to be more understanding as to why it can be so hard to change certain parts of our character. And we may need to recognize that sometimes God will need to teach us through painful lessons, either dealing with the consequences of wrong behavior or being on the receiving end of someone doing the same thing to us as what we did to others. Looking at the life of Jacob also challenges us as to whether our understanding of God is truly shaped by what God reveals of himself in his word and through the person of Christ, or whether we have been explicitly or implicitly taught that we can manipulate or control God by performing certain formulae or prayers, or by forcing God's hand by using other means. Finally, we can be thankful that God relentlessly pursues us over the long haul, constantly wanting us to surrender into his love and his good plans for us. And I pray, may you surrender yourself afresh into God's good plans, and may you be transformed by looking at who Jesus is, and as you seek to imitate him, may you have a life worthy of imitation by others. Well, thank you for joining me this evening, and this will be my last message for a few weeks because I'm taking 2 weeks holiday, and we'll look forward to catching up with you in a couple of weeks' time. God bless you. Bye.